Welcome, everyone. This is Behind the Scenes, a virtual program with Abi Lua about the new exhibit, And So to Work, B.J.O. Nordfeldt's Lambertville. I got to work a little bit closer with Abi in this because it also has a Bloomberg component. And if you don't have the Bloomberg app, we will send the link to download it. I would highly recommend you get it because it has some of the pieces that aren't on display. So I had a little sneak peek, but I think you're going to find it very enjoyable. It is a whimsical and charming and delightful little exhibit. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Abi, but I forgot to mention, if you have any questions, just enter them in the Q&A and we will answer them at the end of the program. Thanks. All yours, Abi.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. As Jen mentioned, my name is Abby, and I am the Assistant Curator at the Michener. And today I'll be giving you all a virtual behind the scenes of the show that I just opened, which, as Jen said, is called And So to Work, B.J.O. Nordfeldt's Lambertville. And so this will be sort of like a behind the scenes tour. Let's see. Oh, we are. Okay. But first, I wanted to give you all just a high-level overview of what the show is about. And so, as you might have read in the description of tonight's program, or as Jen asked earlier, if you already got a chance to see the exhibition, this show is, or really focuses on the modernist artist B.J.O. Nordfeldt and his early years in Lambertville, New Jersey, told through a series of 24 sketches that he drew. So Nordfeldt, who is pictured on the left here, moved to Lambertville in 1937 after a successful and very national and international career. However, upon his move to Lambertville, the artist faced many setbacks as he was struggling to sell art and make a living in an economy still recovering from the Great Depression. And so he experienced a lot of frustration, depression, and loneliness. But then come the 1940s, and Nordfeldt begins making and sending these drawings to his longtime friend, Emily Abbott. And so Emily Abbott, she is pictured there or drawn here on the left. She was a former student of his at the Minneapolis College of Art, where he had taught in the 1930s. And they maintained a distance friendship. And then eventually that turned into romance, and eventually they got married in 1944. And so I'll share a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But as you can see, these sketches are quite simple, but they're also very illuminating and very funny. As I've been reflecting on these drawings with my fellow coworkers, we've all been commenting on how contemporary they feel and the way that they are reminiscent of cartoons from the New Yorker magazine, for instance. There's something very whimsical and fantastical about them as well. So just an example here is Nordfeldt's sketch In Search of an Idea, where he's like literally with a flashlight searching for an idea in this, cobwebbed room of canvases. And so I felt that, this series of sketches that are on display at the Michener right now not only captured a portrait of Nordfeldt, his daily life and his work as an artist, but also a portrait of his time in Lambertville, which is where he ultimately spent the last few decades of his life. So with that being said, I just wanted to go through an agenda of what tonight's presentation will look like. First, I wanted to just start off with, biographical sketches, so to speak, of B.J. Nordfeldt and Emily Abbott. And then after that, I'll go into initial conversations of what this show could have looked like as I was ideating what the show could be. And then I'll go through how I developed the show and the thematic sections. And then I'll finally give a walkthrough of what the exhibition could look like or does look like. And so to begin, I will introduce the main character of the show, so to speak. So the main character of the show is Bror Julius Olson, also known as B.J.O. Nordfeldt. So when you go through the show, his presence, his body, his face figures prominently throughout all the sketches. And yeah, so he really captures his likeness in the spectacles that he wears, in the pipe that he smokes, in the beret that he wears. You'll see that all throughout the sketches. Um, and yeah, so B.J. Nordfeldt, he was born in Sweden in 1878, but eventually moved to the US to Chicago when he was 12, in 1891. And basically, what I wanted to emphasize in this section or in this biography is that even though through the sketches we see an artist who, is very simple in the way he decorates the sketches in his drawings, and is also growing to be, a hyper-local artist in Lambertville. Though we see these in his drawings, actually, when we really contextualize Nordfeldt's larger career, we actually meet an artist who was one, very versatile in a number of media. And two, he was an artist whose training and profession took him across the nation as well as internationally. And so so I'll say, even though we meet Nordfeldt in the show when he was 59, when he moves to Lambertville in 1937, by the time he was 25 years old, he really received like an international um, art education. So he moves to Chicago when he was 12 in 1891, but he eventually went to Paris and then on to England by his early 20s. And then after that, he continued to travel across Europe and eventually made his way through Provincetown, Massachusetts to an art colony there, and then on to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he works and lives for 20 years. And so just to pause here, on the left is a really beautiful painting of Chicago that he did in 1912. He attended the Art Institute of Chicago for art school. And then on the right is a watercolor painting of a Santa Fe landscape, again, where he spent 20 years of his career. And so even though Nordfeldt is known as a painter, or even though he has a really large body of work of paintings, he was also a very skilled and very gifted printmaker and produced like an equally large body of work of prints. And so when he was in England, right before he moved back to Chicago, he encountered, or I should say, not even before England, when he was still in Chicago and when he was in Paris, he encountered a lot of Japanese woodblock prints. And so, for instance, I just love this comparison between The Great Wave by Hokusai and then this print of a wave that Nordfeldt did that's now at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And so you can see a lot of technical and visual similarities here and similarities in subject. And then so even though Nordfeldt encountered prints in the US, he really learned the technique of the colored woodcut print in England. So when he was in England, he was introduced to the artist Frank Morley Fletcher, whose print is on the right. And Frank Morley Fletcher was really the one in England who popularized the color woodblock print technique of the Japanese tradition in England. And so again, I just wanted to have two similarities or two comparisons here. The one Nordfeldt's print on the right is in our permanent collection, and we acquired it very recently. And then I just wanted to add this final slide or not this final slide, but this slide to show that Nordfeldt also diversified in the types of prints he was able to make. So these are a few etchings that he did. The one on the left is of Kemper in France. And if you are familiar with our collection at the Michener, you know that we had a few Impressionist painters who were also in Kemper and painted scenes there. And then he also did an etching of various places in the US. Like, really, like wherever he went, he made an etching of that location. And so you have two examples here. And again, really highlighting the diversity of Nordfeldt's skill and technique. And then after Santa Fe, after those 20 years, Nordfeldt accepted various teaching positions throughout the Midwest. So he was not done traveling. He was in Kansas, and most notably, he was in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis College of Art, which is now the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And so that was really throughout the 1930s. And then finally, in 1937, he moves to Lambertville. And here are two paintings that really represent that time. He As I mentioned earlier, this is really the last town that he lives in and works in. And if you have been to our museum recently, you'll know that Sunday Boredom is currently on display in the Commonwealth Gallery right outside the front gallery. So that was intentional. I wanted to put them in conversation with one another. But just to talk a little bit about these years, scholars characterize Nordfeldt's body of work that he made in Lambertville as like the height of his, gosh, I guess, move towards an expressionist painting. And for those who are unfamiliar, expressionism is an art movement in which artists veered away from capturing the likeness of a formal landscape or formal subject matter and really gravitated towards conveying subjective emotional states. And so the way that Nordfeldt did that here was through, I mean, li quite literally with Sunday Boredom, he's really emphasizing the boredom of this couple. But he also turned toward like a more somber color palette. He focused more on geometry, especially in the barn, as you can see with the pigs and the crows. And so he was really distilling, simpler shapes and highly more like the emotionality of the canvases. And so, as you can see from the past few slides, Nordfeldt's body of work really was quite diverse. And he was really technically gifted in being able to switch between media and technique. And then the second character of the story of the show is, and you don't really see her, but her presence is definitely there, is Emily Abbott Nordfeldt. Emily Abbott Nordfeldt was the recipient of Nordfeldt's sketches, and I highlight the story in the exhibition, but just to briefly explain it here, uh, Abbott and Nordfeldt had met in 1933 when Nordfeldt was teaching at the Minneapolis School of Art. And Emily was in his advanced painting class. But then, even after Nordfeldt had left his post at Minneapolis, the two of them maintained a long distance friendship and they frequently exchanged letters with one another. And as I'll show in the next few slides, Emily Abbott was an accomplished painter herself. And in the letters that Nordfeldt would send to Abbott, he frequently encouraged her in her career, even gave her critique of her art as, had been done in his art classes at the Minneapolis School of Art or College of Art. And so they really had this rich friendship. But then as Nordfeldt moved to Lambertville in 1937 and experienced, various frustrations and setbacks, he actually ended up ceasing all correspondence and all communication with Abbott. And so their friendship was put on a pause. But then it wasn't until the 1940s where he reached out to her and rekindled her friend or this friendship. And so actually these sketches and these letters represent sort of the reconciliation of the two of them. And eventually they get married on September 9th, 1944. And so again, what I want to emphasize with these few slides is that Nordfeldt and Abbott were mutually supportive of one another's artistic careers. And so, yeah, Abbott really was a gifted artist on her own right. And so in this slide, on the left is a painting of petunias that's now at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. On the right is a still life that was sold at auction in 2025, so just last year. And then this is a cityscape of Minneapolis. And yeah, Minneapolis was where Abbott was raised, and she eventually went to undergraduate and graduate school there. And after marrying Nordfeldt, and eventually after his passing in 1955, Abbott was known to devoting herself to his career, and she was devoted to placing his artworks and really securing his legacy by placing artworks at various institutions. But needless to say, she still continued making art throughout her whole life and even beyond Nordfeldt's death. And so pictured here are a few archival materials from our museum and our library, which feature various press releases of shows that she showed at locally or both solo exhibitions as well as group shows. And surely enough, so here are specifically press releases of animal shows. And as I was doing a bit of Googling, surely enough, I found the goose that is in, that in the right. I found that it was sold at auction in 2024. And then on the right is another example of an animal painting. And so, yeah, again, just to say that really this is a story between two artists who fell in love, got married, and yeah, and just really wanted to emphasize that Emily Abbott was also a really gifted artist in her own right. And so then to move into, how this show really come about, we really have to kind of really start at the very beginning of when these sketches came to our museum. So in 2024, I should say, even though our exhibition displays only 24 sketches, actually these sketches came in a group of 122 that we acquired and that we purchased in 2024. And so, oh, before that, already, and I'll say that as we were acquiring these sketches and as we were bringing them into our museum, we already had it in mind to curate a show around them. And so, as you know, when Laura, our chief curator, asked me to think of ideas for shows in the Funk Gallery, I definitely had it in mind to curate a show around Nordfeldt sketches. And it was more a matter of how should we do it? And so when I was ideating, my first idea was, what if we just did an exhibition on artist letters? And so moving on to this next slide, in addition to the Nordfeldt sketches, we have a handful of artworks that are both, that act as both correspondence as well as art. And so we have a lot of examples by John Follansbee, where on like a 3x5 postcard, he has on one side a really light and simple sketch of, sometimes it's like a political belief that he sketches in a cartoonish way, and then sometimes it's just like a daily summary scene. And then on the other side is, uh, the recipient's address, stamps, as well as a short message. And so here's one example. And then here is another example. I was pretty curious about this one. I was wondering if the bird was holding like a laser pointer, but I didn't know if laser pointers were invented at the time. But anyways, I just thought it was really fun and lighthearted. And so, again, Follansbee had numerous examples of these in our collection. And then we also had like several examples by the Impressionist painter, Impressionist artist Henry Snell. And on one side, again, is a very rough sketch. And then on the other side of at least Snell's letters are these letters that are inviting folks to attend his painting class. And so these are just a few examples in our collection. Our chief curator, Laura, she told me that, Fern Coppage had Christmas cards that are in our archives, and I wasn't able to find them. But as we were just discussing these ideas back and forth, we felt that, um, with Bunt really being a small space, it felt better to, or more cohesive to just tell one of these stories rather than a whole host of stories through these artist letters. So in the end, we just decided to focus on the sketches that Nordfeldt drew and really tell that story in full. And so we ended up maybe the artist letters will come in at another point, but for now, we just stuck with Nordfeldt sketches. And so now that at this point, now that I've committed to the idea of a single Nordfeldt exhibition, it was time to develop the exhibition fully. And so there were a few preparatory steps that I needed to take before deciding, how many of the 122 sketches that I wanted to include and how I was going to organize it into thematic sections. And so the first step was to really just officially process these sketches into our archival collection. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what that looks like, processing a collection involves assigning them an accession number. So if you look at this spreadsheet and you see the second column from the left, that is each sketch has its own accession number that helps us to identify it within our record, and then eventually compiling all the sketches into an inventory. So I believe she's here. I couldn't see the guest list or at least who has come in through the presentation, but shout out to Carolina Bromberg, who so diligently processed these archives for me. So thank you. And so with processing and inventorying, we're able to create a record for, when the works do go on display. So if you can see in the last column on the right, the X's mark which sketches are not in its archival box but are on display. So again, it just helps us keep a paper trail. And then the second preparatory step that I needed to take was to capture professional images of these works. When we put the exhibition up on our website, we want to present the show with really nice and professional images of the artworks. And so I displayed the images, or this image here earlier, and on the left is the before, and basically the right is after professional photography. And so we did that for all 122 sketches. And then after that was done, I could really begin to think about, what is the story that I want to tell through these sketches, or what what is the story that these sketches are telling me, or like what is the overarching story? And as I flipped through the sketches and as I really looked at them, thought about them, what stood out to me really was the ways in which Nordfeldt recorded and documented his artistic practice. And we'll see more of that later on as we really move into the thematic sections. But something that I really appreciated about his sketches was, one, I just thought it was really neat to see the ways that he made his work and he shipped this work, just like every step from the ideating to the frame making to the painting to the shipping off to New York. He really captured all of it in these sketches. Um, but then the second part that I really appreciated was that, you know, especially in the light of understanding how accomplished Nordfeldt was, I appreciated the humanity of his sketches and the way that he depicts himself, especially during this period of struggle. I think as even for me, and especially I'm sure for visitors who visit the museum, when we think about artists, we think maybe we have like a romantic or an idealized view of them, where they are able to paint freely or create art freely, and you know really tap into a creativity that has like a never ending and an abundant source, and there's something very joyful about it. But what I appreciated about Nordfeldt's sketches is that he really does not shy away from the difficulty of it and the difficulty of working as a living artist and making ends meet, and where am I going to find my next source of inspiration. That's all there in these sketches, and I really appreciated the honesty that he had, but then also the lightheartedness with which he took himself. They're very funny and he can get very self-deprecating at times. And so I think that was basically the frame with which I wanted to look at these sketches and tell this story. And I think ultimately, I think the frame with which characterized his time in Lambertville. And then in flipping through the sketches to think about a title for the show, I felt like this one really encapsulated that idea that I had, where basically Norfolk was working, and so I titled the show "And so to work," and then eventually I added the tagline "B.J.O. Nordfeldt's Lambertville" as a way to frame these sketches not only as a portrait of Nordfeldt himself, but also the town of Lambertville and his time there. And so now that I had this overarching thematic framing, it was time to whittle down this checklist of 122 sketches to the 24 that are in the show now. And so if you visited our gallery, the front gallery before, you'll know that it's quite a small space. And so pretty early on, as I was talking with our curatorial and exhibition staff, we felt that 24 was a comfortable number to have. And so basically I made my decision from I guess like a multiple choice test, whereas like which ones are the obvious ones, and then moving down to like the nuanced decisions. And so the first easy decision that I made were, what are the most compelling works to me, that I feel are visually compelling, but also really hammer home the story of Lambertville and working in Lambertville. And so these are two examples. For cooling off, I really appreciated the way that Um, Nordfeldt filled the page completely in the dynamism of his shading. And then for unpacking the portrait, I really loved seeing his own signature, but not acting as a signature, but acting as like him writing down his address on a package and unpacking his portrait. And so I just thought that was really neat. And just as a fun fact, we took in the title graphic that you saw earlier, we took the B.J.O Nordfeldt and the Lambertville from the package there. And so we were able to replicate his script. And so these were like the most, these and a few others were the most compelling to me. And then the next easy decision that I made to, cross off works from the list was just looking at condition. Um, Essentially, all the sketches were pretty stable and technically could have been displayed, but then I wanted to just be extra mindful of the artwork safety, even if they were stable. So, for instance, three pulls suggested, which is on the right, had a bit of tears and holes at the bottom, especially, but even in the middle there. So I just wanted to leave that be and not put that out on display. And then on the left is going to the studio in April. Again, it's pretty stable, but I was just mindful of like the tape burn, and I really wanted to keep the captions and I was also like mindful. So these came to us unframed and unmatted, and I was imagining if we were to mat these works, I would want to cover up the tape burn, but I wouldn't want to cover up the caption. So I just felt like it was like a little too close, for instance. So, anyways, this is to say, I was very mindful of condition in crossing out works. And so I just crossed out the works that I just felt like were not in the best condition for display. And then I guess the last two easy categories were just categories of works that I just felt like weren't relevant to the story that I was trying to tell through this exhibition, or were cool, but again, just was like more adjacent rather than like fitting within the tone of the show. And so the first category of those sketches were there were a handful of sketches where Nordfeldt had like these kind of ghost-like portraits. And yeah, I just felt like they didn't really fit the framing of Nordfeldt working in Lambertville. And so, yeah, there were a handful of these, and I just decided to quickly nix them from the checklist. And then the next category that I nixed were these, studio floor plans. These honestly were so cool. And I actually think like for another show, I would love to like put them in, or in a bigger, if I had more space, I would have included these. But because I was thinking a lot about the whimsy and the fantastical elements of the show, even though this I feel is more relevant to, the topic of Nordfeldt working in Lambertville. What did that look like? He's really thinking about his studio space and communicating that to Emily Abbott. I ultimately decided not to include examples of these studio floor plans. And so but I'm just showing them to you now as a way to get them out there. So these two examples, the one on the left is like the inside of a studio, and he annotates it. The right is, you can see the facade or the outside of his studio, and then a bird's eye view of the compound. And then these two are plans or floor plans of his living room. And I also like how he like incorporates the letter element as well, especially with the living room plan on the left. And yeah, and then obviously the one on the right has what looks like water damage, and the ink is really smeared. And then the last category of decision making that I made was the more nuanced one. And basically, the way that I thought about it was that on the one hand, I wanted to find works that could be representative of like a critical mass of examples in the body of work. And so what I mean by that is that, for instance, the sketch on the left, sticking out the tongue, is very representative of a lot of sketches in the body of work where Nordfeldt just draws himself face on, like sitting in a chair and he's doing something. He's sticking out his tongue, he's sneezing, he's blushing, he's sneezing again. So, these are really funny, but we don't need five of these. And so we just wanted to choose one. And so I ended up choosing two, where he's sneezing and he's blushing. But again, just to show that there were just a lot of these and I wanted to just pick one of them. And then on the other hand, there were just a handful of really random drawings that were one-off. They're funny and they had that like whimsical appearance and that humor, but they were just like a little too random, and I decided to pick ones that again were more like that had like a greater representation within the body of work. So bringing in the lamppost was one of them, where I felt was like a little too one-off. And then also, like, basically, lastly, other random considerations that I was making was like I was trying to keep the viewer's comprehension in mind and how they would receive the sketches. And so, for instance, with the work on the left called The Murder, he's, dramatizing him like destroying his artwork or maybe like packaging of an artwork or the canvas. But then I thought, like, is this maybe a little too violent? Will children be scared if they see this? I mean, clearly it's like a non-living thing that he is ripping apart, but like, so I just wanted to be careful there. So I decided not to keep it in, even though I do think it's funny. And then on the right, looking for express, there was a part of me that didn't quite know what he meant by that. Like, is it express for his artwork? Like express packaging for his artwork? Is it express packaging for his letters to Emily Abbott? I wasn't quite sure, and I didn't feel comfortable designating a specific category for it. And there were several drawings that had him looking for express. So I just decided not to include it and not to make a decision about it there. And so that is how basically I came to organize the show, develop the show, and I ended up organizing these four thematic sections as a result. And so I'll just end this presentation with just a quick and dry walkthrough. And so basically, I divided the 24 sketches into four categories. The first is Life in Lambertville. The second is Emily Abbott. The third is Day by Day Doings. And the fourth section is In the Studio. And so for Life in Lambertville, I organized a series of sketches that really told the story of how Nordfeldt moved to Lambertville and why he moved to Lambertville and the ways that his sketches display that life and his growing familiarity with the river town. And so one of the key examples that I'm bringing here to the slides is his drawing Cooling Off, which I showed earlier. So here, Nordfeldt is sitting at the Lambertville house in Lambertville, which is now a hotel. But at the time, upon moving to Lambertville, he lived there for 1 year before moving to his established studio. And included in the wall text is an image of a view from Lambertville House on Bridge Street that was taken by actually our photographer who took the professional photographs. And I wanted to draw that comparison between the 1940s and then present day. And for this one, actually, I didn't include this painting in the show, the one on the right, but Left Behind I did include in the show. But as I was doing my research, I just thought, so I encountered Joseph Pickett's painting in my research of the show, and I just thought, whoa, doesn't this look just like Left Behind? But basically, this drawing, Left Behind, isn't necessarily, I wouldn't say, I mean, I can't make the claim that Nordfeldt was inspired by Joseph Pickett's painting, but I just felt it was so visually similar. So this painting by Joseph Pickett, he was a 19th century folk artist. And here he is depicting Coriel's Ferry in 1776. And so Coriel's Ferry was the name of Lambertville during the 1700s, and then it was officially changed to Lambertville in the 1800s. But if we just visually analyze it, I just thought it was so similar and I thought it was so fun. It would be fun to include it at least for this presentation, where you can see across both works, there are these roadways that stretch the width of the drawing and the painting. And you get these roadways that are interspersed with various buildings. And then you also see animals scattered throughout. And then like kind of like above the horizon line are like trees and imagined greenery. The only difference is that in Left Behind, Nordfeldt makes like a draw, like small sketch of Minneapolis to, I assume, to say that, he's been left behind by Emily as she returns to Minneapolis, because they were still long distance back then. But other than that, I just felt that these two were really similar, and I thought it'd be fun to bring them in. And so basically, with Life in Lambertville, I wanted to um, again, show the artist's growing familiarity with Lambertville, but I also thought that it would be fun for if there are any visitors who are from Lambertville or visitors who are very familiar with the river town. I thought it'd be really fun for them to see, the different landmarks that they can recognize in the sketch. Because in addition to Lambertville House, there's also the New Hope Bridge, also Union Street. So Nordfeldt just includes all these landmarks in these sketches. And then the second section that we have is a section that's just all about Emily Abbott. So I tell their love story in the label. But then through the sketches, we get a sense of, yeah, Nordfeldt's fondness towards Abbott and his anticipation for her visiting and his hopes for her, like a future with her. And so you can see in the right, he's asking if, do you want to go to Maine with me? And then on the right, he's wondering when she's going to visit again. Next, we have day by day doings. And I got the title of this section from a quote that Emily Abbott actually wrote in a catalog. And so in her quote, she writes, Nordfeldt called these sketches foolish drawings that were fun to do. Even if some of them, as he wrote, were a bit fanciful, they were a pictorial record of his day by day doings. And so there were so many day by day doings in this body of work, but I decided to focus on ones that represent his views towards the weather. He was really like, I think maybe like all of us who live on the East Coast were like anticipating the spring, but then it's cold again, and then the day it's warm again, but then it goes back to cold again. And so he has a lot of sketches where he really ponders on that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, he has so many portraits where it's just him in a chair and doing various things, such as sneezing and such as blushing. And so that's another example of a day by day doing. And then lastly, we have the final section called In the Studio. And this is the section that I really emphasize or really display a lot of the works that detail his process. Every sketches ranging from him ideating to him painting. And so he, not only do we get a sense of like what each process looks like, but you get a sense of the emotions he felt through each process. There are times where he's struggling. And so you get a sense of that in the right sketch where he writes, me in despair and how you like the behind, right? He's in despair, but he's self-deprecating at the same time. But then you get a lot of sketches that are just like even tempered in tone, like the one on the left called Paintings Going to New York. So you get a sense of his victories as well as his struggles in these sketches. And then I just wanted to end on just some added elements in the exhibition that that I included for just further visitor engagement. So as Jen mentioned, we worked together on the Bloomberg Connects companion guide for this show. As I mentioned, there are 122 of these sketches, and it is to my lament that we're not able to display all of them. But a way that we could work around that, or a way that we can still kind of tap at that idea, was to include sketches that weren't on display in the exhibition into a companion guide. And so you'll find that here, and it's not too much audio, I just introduce it. And then in like a carousel on the right, for instance, you'll see sketches that relate to the themes but aren't included in the exhibition. In addition, Bloomberg offers us the service of printing free postcards that relate to the show. And so there are 4 options that you can choose from that you can take away for free. And I just thought this would be a nice thing to add because kind of, playing on the idea that Nordfeldt had originally sent these sketches as letters to Emily Abbott. I wanted to invite visitors to take their own postcard and write their own message or their own drawing to send to a loved one or just to keep for themselves. And so we have this little station here, right when you walk in. It's right, you walk in I guess to your left. And we've activated it with like a small antique desk and a chair where you can sit on. And then I'll finally conclude with the ways that we've built the show, just designed the space from this point of departure. So once we added the desk, this antique desk, and this antique chair, my exhibition designer thought, I feel like this gallery, this exhibition needs crown molding on the ceilings. And so if you can see on the ceiling before, um, yeah, that's not original to the space. We bought crown molding from Home Depot, painted it, and then we attached it to the ceiling. And then and then we thought, that was up. We had the tiny desk, and we thought we need a table, we need chairs for this space. And so we just brought a table from our offices downstairs that we've used in exhibitions before. We brought that up, and then we got antique chairs to go along with it. And so, yeah, now I think for me, it feels like I'm walking into a letter. It feels very homey. And I'll just also say that um, something that I feared for the show before this exhibition design was that, I really wanted folks to appreciate the humor and to really get up close to the drawing and to really appreciate, yeah, just the sketches that Nordfeldt did. But I fear that because, they're two-dimensional, they're they're just going to go on a wall. I didn't quite know how to activate it with exhibition design. And so I'm just really grateful for the ways that I personally feel like, the design that we landed on here um, brings folks into the space. It feels inviting, and I think it does invite you to look closely at the sketches and appreciate them. And so that is all that I have for this presentation. I think I saw a few questions come through, so I would be happy to answer anything you might have in mind.
Uh, yes, thank you very much. That it's so fascinating to learn about the behind the scenes and all it takes to bring this to life. Alice had a question. What brought Nordfeld to Lambertville? And did he become part of the artist community there?
So he was introduced to Lambertville or he was introduced by a fellow artist friend, Vladimir Vyaktil. I believe they had interfaced in New York before. And so he was originally introduced there. And then when he visited, he was really drawn to for I think like many artists who had come to settle in the New Hope area, he was really drawn to the countryside. He was really drawn to the solitude he could have there while still being at a relatively close distance to New York and the galleries there. And so for those reasons, he ended up moving to Lambertville. I am unaware of what his artistic community looked like there, apart from Emily Abbott. That's something I would need to do a little bit more research on.
Thanks. I love if he did he ever say anything about always wearing the beret and having the pipe? Like he is a caricature in himself.
He is, and I don't know. I mean, he had glasses all throughout his career. There's a photo of him when he was younger, maybe 20 years younger, um, where he had like this whole head of hair that looked a little like Albert Einstein-y, just like kind of disheveled and all over the place. And he just looked like a curmudgeon, but he still had the glasses. But there was no pipe in the picture. So he definitely had a character that he maintained throughout his career, it seems. But I'm not sure why.
He also had, I noticed a lot of animals in several, I mean, ranging from dogs to spiders to fish. I don't know if he ever said anything about that.
See, I know that yes, I guess first I'll say I get that comment a lot, Everyone always notices the animals, which I love and find fascinating. And then the second thing I'll say is that he does have a few sketches in this body of work where he's addressing animals. Like there is one where he's in front of several dogs and he says, and the caption says, "Who's the boss?" And and so he thinks a lot about animals. I believe I saw a picture in his catalog resume of him with Emily Abbott and a few dogs. I know that Emily Abbott had dogs. And so I think I'd like to think that he had an affinity towards animals, but I do find it interesting that he just scatters little critters all throughout.
Well, he is definitely a character, and it is so much fun. I put in the chat for everyone the link to the Bloomberg Connects to the specific exhibit. And if you haven't downloaded the app yet, it's free. It's a wonderful resource, not only for our museum, but 1,200 institutions worldwide. It makes accessibility much easier for those that are low and no sight, low and no vision. But we're also putting one together, a little promotion for the crossing, which will be open at the end of the month. And there's also an audio tour component for Bruce Katzif's exhibit. So, do we have any other questions from anybody? I think you addressed everything, Abby.
Very good. Yes, please come through to the Michener to see the show.
Oh, great tour, Abby. Thank you. That's someone said. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please come by the museum, see it in person. Like we said, the crossing opens at the end of June. Bruce Katzif will be open until August. So there's some really fun and very diverse exhibits up right now. So anyway, thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope to see you soon at the Michener. Bye, everyone.